Hi there. For this demo, I'll be talking about how you can offset print one block onto an intermediate surface and then transfer it onto a second surface so that you can line up two different printing blocks or more. You can do this repeatedly. In order to prepare for this, I have this is a piece of craft foam. This is the surface that I'm planning to offset my image onto so that I can cut out the craft foam and mount it onto a piece of cardboard that will line up exactly with this plate. So in preparation, I cut the craft foam exactly the same size as my plate. This happens to be 8.5 by 11. I've also already inked up the plate. So you ink it up just as if you're going to print it onto paper. And then you have to have some sort of intermediate surface that you're going to be printing on. And you want something that's not very absorbent because the ink has to stay wet long enough to print off onto the second surface. So things that work really well, this is an overhead transparency that you can buy, at a bookstore or at an office supply store. And this one is cut exactly the same size as the plate, so I could use this. I could line up the edges of the plate with the edges of the transparency and print the image onto this, and then we could transfer that wet image onto the piece of craft foam. If you don't have the overhead transparencies, you can also use something like parchment paper. So that's what I'm going to be using for the demo. The nice thing about the parchment paper is it's a little bit more absorbent than the plastic sheeting, and I'm planning to use this offset image as a registration guide as well later on. So I want to be able to see through the paper and use it as a mirror image or as a straightforward image. So I think that may work a little bit better than using the overhead transparency. So I've centered my block using my registration guide, and I'll be taping down the parchment paper. I think I'll try to decide how to deal with the curl in the paper. I think I'll make it curl side down so that it's less likely to roll off the plate on me. Okay, once I get it down, ooh, it's a little bit crooked. I'm going to go ahead and tape it on there. You want to tape it to the registration guide so that you can keep it in position while you remove the first inked plate and put in the second plate that doesn't have any image on it yet. So I'm going to try to maybe tape it down in one more spot. It feels like it's taped to my tabletop, but not necessarily to my jig. So I want to make sure that it's not going to shift around too much. So I'll put an extra piece of tape on the sides here too. Alright, so at this point we're just burnishing it really well to get the ink to transfer to the offset sheet. This is thin enough that I can see through the paper a lot better. So do a thorough job transferring that image to the transparency sheet. We'll kind of look to see if we've got enough ink on there. It doesn't have to be a perfect transfer, but you do want as much information as you can get on there. So take a little more time maybe to double check that you've got the key parts of the image transferred clearly. Okay, so now we want to keep the offset layer attached to the backing board. I missed that corner, it looks like. And then you'll pull out the inked plate and you'll put in the second plate that you want to transfer the image to. And it's really important that you put it in exactly the same spots that the first plate was in. That'll give you better odds of getting the registration right. And then you want to just gently lower it back down while the ink is still wet onto the second plate. Now the reason that you need this intermediate piece of paper is if you were to take your wood block and just transfer it directly to the craft foam or the second block, one image would end up being backwards from the other one. So you've got to make sure that the image is oriented the exact same way on both printing blocks in order for the registration to work. Check to see how that's transferring really nicely. I'm glad. Okay, I'll rub a little bit more. It doesn't need to be a dark copy. It just needs enough information that you can decide where those shapes are on the second block so you can cut away the right parts. Okay, so once this dries, I'll have a perfect replica of where that image needs to be. This is more accurate than just using tracing paper because you can make a mistake as you're retracing the lines or not trace them quite perfectly, but this is exactly the same shapes. And get my block back here. So again, this was the original relief block, and this is the second block that we'll be using. I'm going to cut away everything except where the floor area is. I was hoping to put another color on the deck surface, the floor surface of the deck, and then I'll be cutting out the areas where I want white to stay on the chairs. I'll have to decide whether it's worth trying to cut all these little marks out or not. I think if I plan to print the chairs in black, it can print right over the other colors, so I don't have to necessarily be super precise about getting you know, all the shapes right where the blacks are, but I do want to make sure I cut out where the light hits the seat of the chairs and the top of the arms. I want those cut away to print as a lighter white. So I may even use the top half of this on a separate block to create some sort of background elements. Again, trees or bushes or some sort of background so it's not just a stark white back there. Okay, the other thing you can do with the offset print, once you've printed it, instead of throwing this away, I'm going to save it because it's a good replica of my image, but it's going to dry really slowly. So one way you can speed up the drying on things like this if you're trying to get to using them sooner is to create a little chalk pack. This has got cornstarch in it. And it's just a little kid's sock. I'm going to tape it down so it's not curling on me so much. You can use cornstarch, you can use baby powder, talc. You could probably use like rice flour or tapioca flour. It doesn't matter too much. The main thing is just kind of to dust it, try not to breathe in the powder. And once you've got a nice, pretty even coating on there, use a real soft bristle brush, and you're just going to gently drag that flour or the cornstarch or baby powder, whatever you ended up using, across the ink. So we don't want to smear the ink. You don't want to be pressing so hard that you're smearing the ink around. You're just distributing that cornstarch over the ink, and that will absorb into the oils of the ink and allow you to be able to touch it without picking up ink on your fingers. So now this is I'm going to dust off the excess powder over the trash can. tap the back side of it. And then I'll have a duplicate of the print, the right size. This is really handy if you don't have a photocopy at your disposal. And we can use the back side too, because it'll be, I can turn it either way depending on whether I need to use it with a monotype plate that I add later, or whether I want to put it underneath my registration guide to help me line up my other colors. It's just pretty convenient to have some extra copies. So save your offset prints, and then you'll just, to clean up your block, if you're going to be printing again in a dark color, you don't need to clean off the ink. If you're going to be cleaning it to change colors, like let's say you wanted to print a really light color, you'll want to just wipe off the plate as carefully as you can. I wouldn't saturate it with soap, but I think I'm just going to try baby wipes. And if you've sealed it pretty well with the acrylic paint, you shouldn't have too much trouble getting the ink off of there. So just do your best to wash it off. Don't take it to the sink and get it wet, or your whole plate will fall apart. You could also print it several times just to get all the excess ink off, print it onto newsprint, and then when not much ink is lifting off, then do the last bit of it with some baby wipes. You could even use a little bit of baby oil on a paper towel if you want to try that, but it's not quite as easy to wipe off these plates as it is cleaning off a scratch foam plate or your monotype plate. So it'll end up looking a little bit grungy here. I probably won't be able to get it bright white again. I only put one layer of sealant on my plate, and if I had done 2 or 3, it probably would wipe off a little bit faster, but it's not too bad. And then I'm just going to store it away with a clean piece of newsprint over it, or some parchment paper so that it doesn't stick to anything as it's being stored. So I'll do the rest off camera, but you get the idea of how to clean your plate. I think I must have missed that spot. It's not wiping off there at all, so that might have been soaking right into the paper. Once I get it clean and it's dry, I can put a second coat of sealant on it to make it wipe a little bit easier next time. We'll stop there.